So our next panel should be very, very interesting. It's kind of the other side of the coin of the panel earlier about how to be a good audio contractor. This is specifically the relationship between audio contractors and game developers. So it's entitled Audio Contractors: Guidelines to Successful Hires, Practices, and Results. We have a bunch of awesome, talented people on this panel, and I'm going to let most of them introduce themselves. However, I will introduce the moderator, Dren McDonald. He is a game audio professional and has worn many hats over the course of many projects. He's been a composer, sound designer, audio director, etc. He's been in-house for Loot Drop, working with John Romero and Brenda Braithwaite, and Tom Hall, and also as the audio lead at Six Waves, LOLAPS, where he worked on Ravenwood Fair. We both worked on it. Yay! It's awesome. And Raven Sky City. He's the director of Nerd Tracks. He's gotten his hands dirty on a bevy of titles for publishers and developers like Microsoft, Gree, PlayForge, Mobilityware, for a variety of platforms. He is also the acting director of development for the Game Audio Network Guild. Many of you might have heard of GANG before. So, without further ado, Dren, take it away.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, I'm curious how many people here are audio contractors or audio people or have contracted? Okay, and do we have any developers in here, producers, product managers? Okay, great. I'm glad you guys showed up. Glad you showed up. Okay, so we'll do a quick introduction of everybody. Go ahead, take it away, Dave.
Hi, my name is David Earl, and I have David Earl Production. I'm also known as SF Logic Ninja on YouTube, because I'm kind of a logic guy. But I've worked with a lot of different folks, Activision, THQ, Sega, Microsoft, Double Fine. And I've done both sound design and composition, although I prefer to compose. I don't really consider myself a sound designer because most of my friends are sound designers, and they would laugh me into the ground if I called myself a sound designer. But working on casual games, a lot of times us composers have to wear both hats.
Michael Roach, Director of Production for Pyramide Studios. I'm mostly a sound designer, but anymore I don't get my hands on too much content because I'm working with the teams, our teams in-house, and the contractors that we're bringing on project-to-project basis. We work on mobile games, casual games, social games, AAA. It pretty much runs the gamut, doing music, sound effects, voiceover. We also do audio mixing as well as post and implementation.
My name is Jacob Rosenberg. I'm a product manager with DNA. I'm also a producer. Shipped over 55 or 60 games as a member of the third-party team with DNA. And I'm also the fortune of being on the other side. I have a music production background, so I have been on both sides of this equation, if you will.
And that's why he's here. So if you notice, you can just hold on to it. We have people from various different sides of the spectrum, if you will, who have been basically in different parts of content creation and production, or overseeing it and getting, Jacob really knows how the sausage is made on the other side. So we're going to try and give you a lot of those perspectives. So starting along, we're going to use this word that a lot of companies like to use, frictionless, which is, I think, a funny word, but I kind of like it. That's kind of where we're starting here. We want our goals really here in all this is trying to ease expectations between the audio contractor side of things, because oftentimes the only contracting that'll be done from a mobile company or an indie company is with the audio side. And so sometimes, especially with a lot of new mobile companies that are popping up around here, there are people who are involved in dealing with the audio contractor who haven't done that before, and they don't know the ropes really in dealing with somebody on the outside. So we're trying to kind of help ease the situation for everyone involved in what we're talking about today. Just kind of talking about our experiences, what we've done in the past, and how that's some things we've learned that have helped us, some things we've learned that have harmed us moving along. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about: expectations, hiring process, feedback process. I'm going to start with a question here, which is, why would you want to, if you're a producer or a product manager, why would you want to hire somebody to create original music or sound effects for your game when you can just go to freesound.com or get some royalty-free music? So I'm going to ask Dave, why? Why would you do that?
Well, a lot of times, producers or audio directors, depending on who you're working with, they want to have music that's integrated into the game and actually helps define the game. So when they're looking for a composer to work on the game, there's a couple of different considerations. They either want somebody who's a Swiss Army knife who can go in and write any style, but they know that they're pretty much going to get what they want, or they're looking for the superstar composer guy who they heard did this other game that they want to have on the game so that their game potentially has that voice on it. And a lot of times when you go to something like freesound.org, or if you try to look up licensed content, there's a lot of effort involved in trying to find exactly the right thing to fit the exact right moment of the game. And it's much easier when you call up a composer and say, here are some ideas that I have, and here are some composers I like to listen to. Could you mock something up for me, or can we create this relationship? And it's sort of like in film when you have directors and composers. You don't see too many directors going out and having licensed music for the entire movie. They like to develop a relationship with a composer where the composer is basically sort of helping to realize the vision of what they're putting up on screen. And in games, it's kind of the same way.
Yeah. From your side of the coin there, Jacob, what situation could you find yourself in where you would rather have royalty-free music or sounds as opposed to hiring someone to work on that? Can you think of?
Yeah, at DNA we really view the launch of a title as our beta. We plan to iterate for years after the launch of a mobile title, if immediately willing to take a game in multiple directions to really drive it towards success. So because of that, just getting one sound usually it doesn't mean we're done. The game might change its tone. The game might add new features. The game will definitely be adding new events. So we'll be looking for that person to help us, like it was just said, define what makes this game distinctive and add new content over time. And it is a lot of work to go through it, the royalty-free options and trying to find the right definition for the audio of a game. It's easier to offload that to someone you trust.
Right. And speaking of trust, this is an issue that actually came up recently, very recently, in the last couple of weeks. There was one of these royalty-free houses, I think it was Pond 5, had someone up there posting music. I don't know if you guys heard about this. This guy had taken a lot of other composers' music and claimed it was his own and put it up there, and is now getting sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's a situation that you as a developer or publisher probably would not want to find yourself in, using music that was in that kind of situation. It's a rare thing, I'm sure, but that actually happened a couple weeks ago. So something to be, fair warning about that kind of thing. I don't know what kind of fail-safes they have involved in a lot of these companies to prevent that from happening, to prove the composers to prove it was their work. But
it's kind of wild that they didn't figure out the rights issues on that.
Yeah, I think it's one of these situations you can just post your own music up there, and they'll say, okay, yeah, that sounds good enough. We'll just sell it for you, and send you a check, and yeah. So anyway, something to think about. There's also the idea that I've come across this a few times, where I'll get a build of a game and they've put some music in it. They said that it was royalty free and they liked it, and it was music that I actually had heard in probably 3 or 4 other games, and sometimes they didn't care. Which kind of bummed me out, but sometimes they're like, "Oh, well, thanks for letting me know." So if you want to actually have a title that, just like we heard in the last session, if you want it to be unique and have an impact somehow, you probably don't want to go with music that we've heard in a couple other games. So. Hiring process. This is one of these areas of friction that we always hear about. So we're going to talk about a few ways that occurs, and not necessarily for the new person trying to get into games, but this is kind of more aimed at people who are new to hiring an audio contractor. so they kind of have an idea of what kind of expect. So I put a few things down here: seeing, hearing previous work, word of mouth, demo a pitch queue. I mean, Michael is in a position where he can choose to work with several people on projects. He puts teams together. How do you usually, find people that you work with?
Sure. So, in general, and this was something that was touched on in the earlier panel, it's going to be somebody who I have a pre-existing relationship, or someone who comes to me via another party who I know. So that's one of the key things that, for the contractors out there, I can't really stress enough, is building up those relationships, always working your network, always getting out there, being a part of the community, joining organizations like Gang. The more people you know in this industry, it's only going to help you as you go along. And also, just being really easy to work with, being very approachable, because even during the very initial phases of contracting and getting a project off the ground, you can tell a lot from that about what the working experience is going to be like with a person, and being very communicative, being proactive in the information that you need to get from your potential client, as well as the information that needs to be given, or if information is asked for. So those are some of the big things in just the initial phases of getting a project off the ground that that I'm always looking for.
This is for all you guys. Do you guys receive a lot of emails, say from other audio people, composers, sound designers, saying, "Hey, if you ever need me on a project, let me know"? Tons, right? Right. So, if you're a producer or a product manager, and someone has your email address out there, you probably get a lot of these requests from lots of people writing to you. And I know a lot of designers that I work with get tons and tons of requests all the time. So I know it can be fairly. My point here is that it can be the needle in a haystack sort of problem. Finding the right person for your project. So I think word of mouth is probably at the top of the list here, and then looking and seeing what other other work that has been done by certain composers and sound designers, things that you like. If you see a game that you like, hopefully you can find out, who worked on that and find them for your game. Negotiating. So let's see, David, who do you usually negotiate with for when you're talking about a new game? You talk with a producer or a game designer, audio director?
It depends on the company. The larger they are, generally, the more you're going to get talking to an audio director. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be the ones who you negotiate with, and then they negotiate internally with the company. And it's sort of this interesting thing, because they're somebody that you're negotiating with, but they're also the ones who are championing you to the rest of the company. So you have to handle that relationship very, very carefully, and because those are the people who are going to be your advocate to the rest of the company and make it happen. They're also when you get to the point where you're working with producers, you generally have an established relationship already, and what's happening is, instead of going directly to the audio director, you're working with a producer because the director's really, really busy. They've already used you a couple of times. They don't need to go through this intense negotiation. They're basically going to take it on a project by project basis, and you're going to speak with the producer. So, and then when it's a really small company, you got a couple guys in a garage making a really awesome game, you'll talk to them directly, and it'll be more of a direct relationship. You'll go out to lunch and talk it over and negotiate your contract and try to, manage their expectations, because they may have no idea how much they're going to end up paying for audio, and you're going to have to be careful about that as well, and negotiating that relationship and sort of guiding them into this process of paying for a bunch of music and, sound design, and understanding the value of that.
So I did this online poll over the course of about a week, getting a lot of information to share with this panel, and so I have some interesting numbers here. We'll look at as we go through. In this area here, I asked about agreements. What kind of agreement do you get? So 36% use an agreement given to them by the developer or the publisher. They usually make a few changes, but usually the agreement originates with the developer or publisher. 33% have their own agreement that they use, and they usually have to make changes with with the developer publisher. And then, unbelievably, 17% relied on emails and didn't do a contract, which I found astounding. But I have a feeling it might have been some of the beginners or maybe people who do a lot of independent work, working with indie developers. And then another thing in the poll, we were just talking about who our point person is when we negotiate. Most contractors negotiated with a producer. Secondly, the CEO, and third, the audio director. And then I had a whole list of other people, and everyone else fell pretty short off of that. Usually producer, CEO, or audio director. I think product manager might have been the next closest one. So we're going to go to discussion of rates. So this will be interesting. Okay, so on the contractor poll, 43% of those who filled it out worked on a per asset rate, which means a certain amount of money per asset for sound effect, a certain amount of money for minute of music. 34% of people worked on a project rate, so they just gave a bulk rate for the whole project. I want $5,000 for your iPhone game, that sort of thing. 23% worked on a day rate, which kind of surprised to see that with a lot of people who are still contracting. But that is fairly popular, especially in AAA development. You'll see that a lot more. So 60% on the sound design side of things, 60% were charging at least $45 to $75 per sound effect asset. And 62% were in the ballpark of the $800 to $1,750 per minute of music. Now, we'll say if we bring that down to about 50%, no, I'd say even 58%, it would probably be closer to $800 to about $1,500. Yeah. The sweet spot seemed to be right around $1,000 to $1,200. That was where most of it was. And then day rates, 60% were $450 to $650 per day, and 40% $100 to $400 per day. So what we found here as well is I asked some questions about experience. And so what we saw here was a very strong correlation between rates and experience. So 82% of those responding had 3 to 9 years of experience or more. And then when we saw a very low kind of outlier rate of per asset or low minute rate, which I have here, $200 a minute or less, or $35 bucks per sound effect or less. That was usually somebody who had 0 to 1 years of experience or lived in Hungary or somewhere in Eastern Europe. And a lot of those people have a very low living cost of living, so they work very cheap. But then they're also very hard to communicate with. So there's a trade-off. If you're expecting to pay $150 a minute or $35 a sound effect, there's a trade-off in that. You're going to have somebody who probably will not get it right the first time, or will have some communication issues down the line. On platforms, PC, Mac, and iOS were the clear leaders. Most people were working on those platforms at the moment. And next was Xbox and PS3, and surprisingly, Android was after that. And then way down at the bottom, Facebook, HTML5, Wii, etc. So one more thing, and then we'll move on to actually talking back with you guys. Size of teams I thought was kind of important. 60% worked with small teams, and I don't. How about you guys? That's usually my experience. 1 to 6 people. 48% worked for small devs or publishers or indies. I thought this was interesting. 76% of them delivered via asset, which means they just would deliver via FTP or Dropbox, just here's the assets, put them in the game. However, 75% would rather deliver via middleware or put it into the build themselves. So if you're just asking for your audio contractors to just send the assets and we'll take care of it, most of them would be much happier to actually put it in the game and work with you on that level to make sure it sounds right. 37% received direction via build, docs, or spreadsheet, but 80% would rather prefer to receive direction with build docs. So not enough of them were getting a build. Most people wanted to see a build, but most, 37% weren't actually getting a build to actually see the game. We work hard, it seems like. 56% worked 51 to 60 hours a week. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize in the game industry is how much money we all spend on our gear and our software updates and our software libraries and all of these things. So 66% of us spent $10,000 or less on gear. And then we also have to update these things all the time, right? Our iPads and our Androids. And 48% of us were spending $2,000 or less on game devices, and that's per year. Okay, last thing here, revisions. This I thought was interesting. 2 revisions. This is when you're offering your rate, revisions usually included in that, and 27% said they only offer 2 revisions per asset or per minute. 26% said 3 revisions, and 4 to 6 revisions for about 10%. So if you're a PM or a producer and you're asking for revisions over and over and over and over again, that's usually not very helpful for everyone involved. So I think generally everyone tries to keep that fairly contained. And again, that's going to commiserate with experience. If you have people that are very experienced, they're going to know what you want. They're going to know how to make this all work together. So all that being said, we're going to talk about some things that went wrong. So does anyone have any good stories about something, a game development story where something happened and maybe something went awry? Who's got a good one?
You guys gonna want to go first? Or you want me to go? Let's have my go first.
You know, one of the pitfalls when you're going into a project is not really understanding your capability, or maybe really understanding what a client is looking for, and underbidding it and underscoping it, and really biting off more than you can chew. And unfortunately, some of that just comes from experience and going around a few times and knowing how many minutes of music you can crank out a day, or knowing if how many sound effects you can do in a day. And those numbers, especially when it comes to sound effects, can be really moving targets. But it's really about understanding your own capabilities, knowing your own workflows and what you can output. Because the worst situations I've always been in have been when we literally are taxed, where those 51 to 60 hour weeks are nothing. It's more like 70 or 80 hour weeks, because we get into a situation where, and I'm not saying this has happened recently, but where someone would get into a situation like that, where they just said they promised too much and they weren't able to deliver on what they promised.
Any other good stories?
So I had a very long relationship with this company, and I usually did casual games with them. They did these little PC and Mac games, and they got really good franchises: Pokemon, Incredibles, all these great IPs. Thank you. Need food. But, and it was always really fun to work with them because I had a really good relationship with the producers. Well, they decided they're going to start going into AAA, and they were going to start making games that were going to go on, a Wii and possibly get into Xbox and things like that. And they decided to hire a new producer. And the new producer was young and new, and I can't speak to his experience, but all I know is that it was the hardest thing ever to, because I had to communicate with this person who, it seemed pretty obvious that they didn't have the legacy of they didn't get the legacy of all the communication that I'd had with the company before. So it was a really hard transition for them to go from doing casual titles where basically you get an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of like, here are your assets and here's your descriptions, and you fill out this spreadsheet and you do this thing, to getting into more of a AAA zone. They obviously just the growing pains were insane, and trying to satisfy their needs was really difficult as well. So to handle that situation, it was very dicey and very hard, and sometimes you don't win. Sometimes you don't win. Sometimes you're not going to convince them. Sometimes you're not going to be able to go through the process well. And there were some things that happened on that project that just, it wasn't about how good the assets were. It was about there was a breakdown in communication between my team and the producer that we were talking with. Unfortunately, that company didn't make the transition into working with these, game consoles, and it was very difficult. But, you can't win all the time, and when you don't, and you still have this, you do all this awesome work and things keep flowing along and things are great. It's good to have those markers occasionally. It's good to have something happen where, no matter how hard you tried, you just couldn't, you made it through the project and you shipped it and it's all good, but you have to just keep moving on to the next experience. And a lot of that has to do, if you have a new person or you're dealing with somebody, in this case it was a new producer and they're making a transition and a change and stuff like that. Very difficult. That was the hardest thing. And granted, these things don't happen hardly at all, but when this particular situation did happen, it was really hard. But you know what? Still going. So.
Do you have any good stories there, Jacob? If not, I can move on.
I'll weave them into the end. Let's
all right, let's move on. All
I
right.
want to tell the good stories.
All right. Yeah, we got good stories next. So as we kind of touched on here, some other points from the poll. Your point person has roughly the same amount of experience I have. So 45%. I thought that was actually pretty good. 25% less experience than I do. I think that's what Dave is kind of referring to. You often run up against people, if you're an audio contractor who's been around for a while, that you might run into people whose last job was at the Apple store or something, and you just have to kind of work with them and be nice. Some other things that might play into that. Favorite way to work, 71% said, my point person gives me a description of the project, story, and emotions, and lets me find my own direction. And that tends to work pretty well for most of the people. Then 27%, my point person gives me specific audio direction with examples and temp music, and then maybe a little bit more hand-holding there, but some people like that. And then 2%, my point person is often uninterested, and whatever I come up with is usually fine. So apparently 2% thought that was okay. This section, when actually we did the poll, I had a lot of people also write and tell me, you could have made that paragraph on bad feedback examples much bigger. I had a lot more to say. So here's just some examples of feedback that doesn't really, when you have audio people trying to connect with people who don't have any background in music, there's always going to be some kind of clash because there's a specific language and references that most audio people have. And you have to find this common language and find a way to make that work. And it's a huge part of the challenge. So some feedback that didn't really work. Make it sound like a potato at rest was my favorite one. Maybe try making it in a major key instead of a minor key. I've gotten that one a lot. And that often comes from people who aren't music people. So if you don't have a lot of experience in writing music and you're giving that sort of feedback, it may not be very helpful. I like this. The boss music needs to be more feminine. Being asked to make sound effects more shiny. So sometimes you just have to, as an audio contractor, that might be bad feedback, but eventually you're going to have to understand what that means, what that person means when they say, I want it shiny, or I want it couscous, which some of you said.
Yeah. So these are always the most fun. I call them producer speak, and I started in the I started in the ad world, and when you do advertising, I mean the game guys are usually way more hip, but when you're in advertising, it's just the things you'll hear. I want it to sound like crab claws, or and. What ends up happening is you get this mind reading. It starts to happen. You start to do this interpretive dance in your head. When they're talking with you, they'll say certain words, and you have to ascribe those words to musical language. And then there's sometimes like the major minor thing, you just can't win.
Yeah.
I had so many tools for turning my entire song from major to minor quickly, so I could just show a producer what it sounded like. It's like, oh, okay, bink.
Sometimes
that
you can
sounds awful.
Just take out the shakers or say something and say it's major now, and cool. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, well, I won't talk about my dirty tricks, but there's a lot of psychological games that you can do to kind of make those situations right. The producer knob that's not hooked up to anything. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Okay, we're going to get into the good stuff here. Okay, so we're going to give some examples of things that really worked for us. Some examples. Examples that some ways that we worked, some methods that we've come across that tended to give us very successful results. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think setting expectations is really great. I've seen some good examples of on other projects where you'll see this a lot with the independent developers where they don't know what they're really asking for, and the sound designer will help educate and say, you are asking for the world, and it's a little shitty Android phone that's not going to be able to support that. And I think having both sides be open is always going to be the best case scenario to make a mutual a place where everyone gets what they want. So that's always going to be the goal, and it's the antithesis of all the bad examples that we saw. So I don't know, what's your favorite projects you guys have ever worked on?
Well, there have been a lot of favorite projects, actually. Been very fortunate to work on a lot of really cool games with a lot of really talented people. Going back for a second to the producer speak thing, we were working with a guy recently who had a bachelor in music, but it was one of his many degrees. Actually, a very very learned man, but really got into minor details in this very complex orchestral score that we were working on, to the point of, well, maybe we should change this accent here, or that's an F sharp, and maybe it should be an F, and here we are working with a composer who's been doing this for 30 years. Who has degrees from the Berklee College of Music in jazz composition, who's been doing orchestration for TV and film, and he knows what he's doing, and then there's a certain point where you just have to trust the people that you hired to do the job that you hired them for.
How do you mitigate that? That's kind of how you need to be the one who's the advocate for the composer.
Right. It's tough. I have to kind of be the arbitrator in the middle of that situation. And there's compromise.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of compromise that you have to make. Until they leave the room, and then you just change it back to the way it was. But no, there is. It's really, and that's just more about negotiating the relationships with the clients that you have and with the contractors that you're working with, knowing when to push, when to pull, knowing where those boundaries are, and having a good relationship in the first place to start off with is always the best thing, because then your boundaries and your limits are pushed out a little further. In terms of good stories, I've worked with both Dave and Dren on multiple projects, and just in general, one of the things that I love about working with both of you guys is their responsiveness and their speed. And back to the 50, 60, 70 hour work weeks thing, I can email them at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and I know I'm going to get a response probably before I get into work the next day. Really being over the top like that is ultimately, will be what separates the wheat from the chaff in this world. So yeah, working with these guys, working with any number of people. I just did a project with Lenny Moore. Wrote a lot of just incredible music for us, and he's also just a very talented orchestrator as well as composer,
and friendly and fun to hang out with.
Yep.
So.
Yes, he is indeed, and has so many good stories.
Yeah.
If you ever bump into him at GDC or anywhere, just let him talk for a while, because he's got a lot of great stories.
Bay Area institution.
Actually, that's something I could quickly say,
Yeah.
which is just remember that this is an incredibly small industry, and you're going to work with everybody multiple times, and everyone knows everyone. The guy that stole the guy's music and puts it up online will never work in this place again.
Yeah.
I think one of my more recent success stories.
What's on that one?
Yeah. Is actually, so Dren and I, worked on a bunch of projects before, built that trust. I know what he can deliver. I was working with a game developer on our mobile game platform. He said, I have this other project. I need some sound for it. You know any guys? I know Dren. I know what Dren can do. Fire and forget. I know that they'll handle the communication from there. 6 months later, actually, I run into the guy at a bar at another event. He goes, "Hey man, thanks so much for getting me Dren." That's now following up on that. He's like,
cool.
It was awesome working with him. Got the project done, but we kept on our current business. Makes me look good. Dren made me look good. I didn't have to do anything, and I'm still shipping games with everyone around there. So just know that everything's going to get back to you. So do what you say you're going to do. So, and John says hello.
So yeah, I think what we're saying here is for projects that tend to go well, there's a lot of good communication, a lot of experience, and people tend to trust each other. I'm going to give some examples of some useful feedback, and we can drill down on that a little bit more with questions here. Aaron, how are we doing on time?
You have about 10 minutes.
Okay, we're doing good. Okay, so Here's some examples of some feedback that audio contractors thought was super helpful. Being sent a number of example YouTube vids demonstrating musical style desired. I get that a lot, and I'm sure you guys do too. That usually helps at least try to bridge that gap between the non-musical and the musical people. Just saying that, if you're a producer, you don't have to say, hey, I liked when I modulated from G minor to B flat. You can say, I really like this section where I think I hear it's violins or something here, and I like the way it got faster at this part. You can use non-musical speak, and it's fine when having a reference. It really helps. Description of emotional feeling that the designer was reaching for. That's something that I often use. I'll talk directly to a designer to try and get what they're trying to achieve in any moment in the game. This is a good one, I thought. This came from not an audio director, but someone else this guy had been working with. He said, okay, we're both hearing that music is good, but is not fitting the gameplay loop. If you wanted to pick 3 other styles for this game loop, what would you instinctively go to? And what I didn't write on here was the rest of the story, where the guy said he gave the designer 3 other potential ideas, and they ended up using one of them. And I think that's a nice way to just kind of say, what would you do, and show me some choices of what your options were. That's kind of what we discussed
As
before.
long as that doesn't get out of control.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't get out of control. Exactly. But it sounded like they sort of had a relationship, totally, yeah. And if I have a relationship with someone, I don't mind doing that. When a game developer tells me it's either working or not working in terms of pacing, that usually helps, especially if examples are provided. So pacing is a big part of the audio side, making sure that you're matching sort of the pace of the game. And you followed my description, and I feel my description was wrong. You'd better let your own feeling guide you. I thought it was a good one too. If you can find someone that actually says, I think I was wrong, and they say, just do what you think is right. This is one that I really like, which is offer your problem, not your solution. And what I mean by that is, don't come to me and say, I think the hi-hat is it's wrong. I think it should be triplets instead of 16th ounce, major instead of minor, whatever it should be. I don't need that information. I need to hear something else, like, okay, I don't think this is working, maybe it's the pace, I don't think this is working, maybe, I don't like it because of this. Don't try and tell me what your solution for the problem is. Just tell me what the problem is. And, you hired me, so let me try and figure it out, and we'll work on it together. Do you guys have any other advice, kind of like in that vein of positive feedback?
I just had a flashback to a horror story I had where actually
we're trying to be on good stories.
This was before I was a producer. I was doing some post audio for a little video, and the director was calling me up, telling me my multi-band compressor settings to use on the final thing.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that my mid range needed to be like 2.5, and I was like, it's. But having been through that, I now it comes out on the other side. I think. Realize that it's a two-way street, that if you're not getting what you want from the developer too, you don't have to take the project, or at least maybe you don't have to take crappy producer feedback, and seek out the good producers, because they're the ones that are going to be working in the future. But also come with an area of openness. Sometimes when I go to my audio guy and I say, I literally just need this, don't overanalyze it too. If you have that relationship, and if they want triplets on the hi-hat, sometimes just give them triplets on the hi-hat. If they come back and now they want something else, then yeah, there's probably a larger problem that needs to be addressed. Right. So, yeah, take it in context.
One thing that I think is really important for people who are composing or doing sound design or whatever is don't take things personally. Yeah. It can be scary when you're working on something really big that has a lot of name recognition and all eyes. You feel like all eyes are on you. And I had a situation. I was working with somebody, and it was actually it was the Halo thing with Paul, and we were on a phone. It was a Waypoint, so yeah, and we were on the phone having a conference call, and the feedback that we get is, yeah, the music's just not working. And our initial reaction is like, okay, we'll do everything we can. We're going to stay up all night for the next 3. That's the initial reaction internally. And then you kind of have to stop and go, oh, really? What do you think is wrong? and ask the question and try and draw the information out. Don't have these emotional reactions to it, because it's not about you're fine, you're a great composer, you're a great sound designer. This isn't about, it's not going to ruin your career to have, So when we got the feedback, when we asked for it, when we said, could you give us some feedback? He gave us a bulleted list with it had time code on it, for this clip that we were working in. And he was giving us meticulous feedback. And once we had that, we nailed it. We were able to do it in an afternoon instead of freaking out and doing the best thing we possibly could in 48 hours, Instead, we were able to do it in the afternoon because we had the input that we wanted, because we didn't freak out, and we asked for the feedback and we got it, and it ended up being awesome. And it also developed a trust with the producer, because he's like, oh, cool, they want to know what I think. So anyway, that was just that was a story where I remember a very visceral emotional reaction, and that ended up working out really well. So.
All right. Well, these are kind of tying into our last bit of this, which was just parting philosophies here. So I know how many people am I going to see touch their ear? I was kind of waiting for that. Okay.
Is this the Pac-Man?
Yeah, it's the Pac-Man thing. Yeah.
My wife didn't get that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I got it immediately.
So do you guys have any pieces of advice you think might be helpful to either producers or audio contractors, anyone involved in this equation?
Maybe one for each. For the producers and people who are in-house, as Dave was just saying, the most helpful piece of feedback, the most helpful piece of feedback you can get are those bulleted lists where it's very detailed and very specific. Hire an audio director or somebody who knows that, if you don't have that, who can give that kind of feedback, because that is really the most valuable kind of feedback we can get as audio people. For the contractors, and since it's a philosophy, I'll make this sound kind of philosophical. Locked inside of every gig, you'll find the secret to your next gig. And again, that's just all about the relationships. And if you succeed on one gig, that will be remembered. They'll either come back and hire you again, or they'll tell a friend, and the friend will hire you. So there you go.
I can't follow that. Are you kidding?
This is imparting philosophy. Anything that you think might be helpful to anyone involved in this equation?
Well, relationships. It's really, your relationships are really, really important. Make sure to keep people around you that are doing more interesting things than you are. One thing that's happened with me that's just been a blessing is that my friends that I grew up with from high school, and college, they're all working in games. So it was like this crazy thing where I naturally sought out these people who are interested in what I was interested in, and we all just sort of start going into these interesting, cool places. And those relationships are really powerful, because when you're talking with a company and you have somebody on the inside who's your advocate, that's awesome. And then going to becoming a member of gang, or one of these, coming to these conventions and things like that, and just going out and buying somebody a beer could be your next gig. It's really funny how it works that way. But look for your relationships and make sure that the people that you keep around you are doing more interesting things that are more interesting than what you're working on right now, because you'll end up getting something cool out of that. As long as you're nice.
I actually got one.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think the last thing I would want to say is recognize that if you're an audio contractor and you're working with your producer, that producer has a million things on their mind. The project might be on the verge of being canceled. The CEO of the company might be telling them that they want new hi-hat sounds. They may be on their own with no support, and they really believe in this game, and they're just trying to advocate it to the entire company. You are just one part of making that producer's job, making the game as awesome as possible. So make that person's life as easy as possible, even if they're being ridiculous in their requests, because you never know what other pressures they're facing, having faced those pressures. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the reasons I wanted Jacob here, is because I think a lot of audio contractors, I hear this a lot, that, oh, no one cares about the audio. No one cares about my work. I work so hard and no one gives a shit. They put it in the game and it doesn't sound good. Well, there's a reason that everything kind of waterfalls that way. And especially in mobile games, that this happens all the time. You're at the end and because of all the things Jacob just said. There can be a lot of things going on in the studio. Having been in-house and a contractor, I kind of know what can go on and how crazy things can get when you're trying to hit a milestone for a publisher or whatever it might be that will happen. That things can go pear-shaped, and if you don't hear from somebody for a while, don't keep bugging them. They're going to get a hold of you when they need to, and make things right. So I think that's a great point. So at this point, do we have any questions? We've been barking up here a long time. You probably don't want to hear us talk anymore. Yeah.
Are these slides going to be up online later?
Are they? You putting them up? Okay, great.
Short.
There you go. Yeah, the pants, frictionless, yeah.
Yeah, Dren, how many people were in the poll? I missed that. Did you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I left that out. We had 80 people respond.
80 people.
Yeah, so it was pretty good. And I only had it open for a week, so, yeah.
So in this panel, you guys mentioned this a little bit, and in the earlier panel, this was talked about too, of if you don't have a lot of experience to show to somebody of what you can do, that you like make a demo where you take a trailer that's already been made and kind of redo the audio for it or things like that to just show your capabilities.
Yeah.
How legitimate is that as how do you feel about ever hiring somebody who gave you something like that?
Okay, pass the mic over to David, and I'll answer a little bit. I can say that I think that certainly helps. I think what helps more is showing in-game stuff, like showing that you actually can work in an environment where you have to make things work within the game build. It's great to show what you can do in a trailer or something like that. I would say work if you're going to go that route and you don't have the opportunity to kind of put something together in code or whatever. I would take a trailer that wasn't like a film style trailer, but more of an in-game. Yeah, exactly. I would stick with an in-game kind of looking demo, so it shows that you kind of understand how games work and how repetitive sounds need to occur. And if you're going to go that route of just doing a linear kind of demo, but like I said,
The more creative you are with that, the better off you are. One thing I would suggest is if you could get gameplay, like a long linear gameplay, and then you download Fmod or Wise, which is an implementation software, and there's a program called ScreenFlow, which will capture your screen. And what you could do is you could literally show a video of somebody doing gameplay, and in the implementation tool, you're triggering cues, and you're showing how the cues and conditions trigger, maybe, and do it in both. Do one in Fmod, and then do the other one in Wise and show that you understand how containers and transitions and game states work. If you do that, you'll get a job. Because the more effort that you put into it, and in showing that you're really concerned about in-game. And the unfortunate reality, though, you may not get that control when you actually get the job. I mean, I hate to break people's heart with that, but it's like, what you do is you wow people with all of this. Oh my gosh, well, he's definitely all about games, and even if you're an asset cannon, shooting music over the wall, that's how you generate interest, and it will differentiate yourself. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you'll definitely make a mark. That's all I have to say.
Just real quick, the new version of Wise actually includes Limbo. So you can, the game Limbo. Yeah. So you can play around with Limbo and put your sounds in there and replace them and see how those transitions and everything was working on that game and really, yeah, they don't. Yeah, I know. So it's a really great tool to play with. Yeah.
Also check out the Unity engine. That can be a good.
Yeah, Unity's pretty great for sound replacing stuff.
There's also piles of indie developers down there that are looking for.
Yeah.
Go help them for free.
Or students. I would talk to student projects and try and get something like, or game jams if you're not familiar with game jams. Game jams happening all the time. Global Game Jam. We just had the Molyneux Jam here. Molyneux Jam here.
Who's making a game for our company?
Oh, nice.
The other thing is also build up your library so that you bring something to the table. You're not starting from scratch, and you can do that anytime.
Yeah. I think we're out of time, so thanks everyone. If you have any other questions, just grab any of us. Thanks.